Hi, my name is Michelle, and if you clicked on this video, it's probably because you or someone you know has been recently diagnosed with insulin resistance. You probably have a lot of questions like, what is it? How does it hurt my body? Can I get rid of it? What does it look like? How do you know that you have insulin resistance? So we're going to answer these questions in this video. I am neither a doctor nor a scientist, though I am working on that. So this video is only limited to my personal experience and what I have learned on this subject. So what is insulin resistance? It is a condition in the body where insulin is very high to the point where the body has to become resistant to it. And we'll discuss what that means. But a very important key factor to this is that high insulin and insulin resistance go together. You cannot tease those two apart. You cannot have insulin resistance without having high insulin to begin with. So then we should discuss what is insulin. I'm sure you've heard of it before. Insulin is a hormone that the body makes. It is actually something that the pancreas makes. If you look behind me, that is a rendering of an insulin molecule. The green one over there is also another rendering of the insulin molecule. And this here is the pancreas, where it is made in. It's right in, screw back, right underneath your stomach, a little bit behind the intestines, underneath your stomach. That's where the pancreas is at. And this hormone is a growth hormone. It makes everything grow. That's its purpose, is to feed every cell in the body. Every single cell in the body has a receptor to insulin. Insulin feeds everybody, non-discriminately. That's what insulin is. And since insulin likes to make things grow, one of the most common signs of insulin resistance or having too much insulin is belly fat, especially that little pooch. If you have that little pooch, the rest of you is fit and healthy, and you just have this little pooch that you can't seem to get rid of. That is a sign that you have too much insulin and you have developed insulin resistance. Another thing that insulin likes to grow is skin tags. If you've noticed the appearance of skin tags on your neck or near your eyes or just anywhere in your body, that is a product of high insulin. That is one of the signs that you have high insulin in your body and have probably developed insulin resistance. Another sign of insulin resistance is called acanthosis nigricans. It's basically when your skin turns kind of a darker color on your neck, your armpits, your groin area. You'll get darker skin. Sometimes it'll feel more velvety. You'll try to scrub it away. It looks like you have a dirty neck, but it just won't scrub away, it won't clean away. That is a sign of acanthosis nigricans, and it is a condition that is caused by high insulin and insulin resistance. Another product of high insulin is infertility. For women, it's PCOS, and for men, it's erectile dysfunction. And then there's high blood pressure and kidney issues that also stem from having too much insulin. And there are many more conditions that are affected either directly or indirectly by high levels of insulin. And we'll talk about a few more of those at the end. But right now the question is, how do we get high insulin? What causes high insulin in the first place? I'll start with the least common causes. There is a condition called nesidioblastosis. It's also known as beta cell hyperplasia, or also known as NIFS. In this condition, the beta cells that make insulin are larger than normal. So the larger they are, the more insulin they make. So when glucose comes in and it signals to the body that, oh, it's time to make insulin, they're doing their job, but because they're bigger, they make way more than is needed. That's called, most commonly, nesidioblastosis. And the second least common cause of high insulin is something that actually I have. It's called an insulinoma. It's a tumor on the pancreas that makes excessive insulin. The most famous person that I know of that has had this condition is Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple. He is known throughout the world as having had pancreatic cancer, but that is a little bit misleading because what he had is a neuroendocrine tumor called an insulinoma. And most pancreatic cancers actually adenocarcinoma. It's a very fast-growing cancer that, for instance, Patrick Swayze had. One of the common risk factors of pancreatic cancer is smoking, and Patrick Swayze was a smoker. And so that led to him having pancreatic cancer, which is a very fast-growing cancer, and it will kill the person pretty fast. An insulinoma is a little different, where it will grow very, very, very slowly for a very long time, sometimes decades, before a person notices any, before it basically becomes bad enough to stop, your ability to live a good, healthy life. 90% of insulinomas are benign tumors. They're not aggressive, they grow very slowly, and surgery is usually curative. 10% of insulinomas are malignant, and they are a bit more aggressive, and they can cause more problems, just like in Steve Jobs' case. And since I have an insulinoma, and if you're curious to know more about insulinomas, I will be posting videos in the future with more details. Hi guys, so a little interruption here. There are 2 more common causes of insulin resistance that I didn't know about last year when I recorded this video. And so I will plan on making a more detailed video in the future that will include those 2. But for right now, they are chronic inflammation and chronic stress. In both cases, you are raising your counter-regulatory hormones like cortisol or adrenaline in response to either stress or inflammation. Both of those hormones raise sugar levels, and when you raise sugar levels, you raise insulin. When you keep insulin elevated chronically, then you cause insulin resistance. So it's not like exercise is a stress, but if you're never taking a rest, never taking a break, you're always go, 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 that leads to a chronic elevation of stress hormones, which leads to a chronic elevation of sugar. It doesn't have to be high sugar. Just be a little bit over 100 is enough to keep you elevated. And then if you keep sugar elevated, you keep insulin elevated. And when insulin is elevated constantly, then that leads to insulin resistance. So now let's discuss the most common cause of high insulin, and that is diet. If you didn't know, there are certain foods that cause a higher spike in insulin than others. And knowing what those foods are will help us to make the right choices so that we will keep our insulin levels lower and not cause insulin resistance. But before we get into those foods, let's backtrack just a little bit and go over those reasons again why we don't want insulin resistance, why we don't want high insulin. So there was the infertility issues, the skin tags, the dark skin on your neck and armpits that you can't get rid of, heart issues and kidney issues and obesity, and there was another one that we hadn't discussed, and that is type 2 diabetes. Insulin resistance leads to type 2 diabetes. In fact, type 2 diabetes is a form of insulin resistance. A type 2 diabetic doesn't have low insulin. That's type 1. Type 1 has little to no insulin, but type 2 has an excessive amount of insulin. To paint a little picture of insulin resistance, we can imagine going to a concert where the music is really loud, and if you go without ear protection, it could damage your hearing. So the ears will downgrade its ability to hear so that your hearing won't be damaged by the loud noise, by the excessive noise. So it kind of downgrades its ability to hear so that it doesn't get damaged. In the same way, an overabundance of insulin can be very damaging to the body. We need insulin. We cannot live without it. It feeds all the cells of the body. It takes glucose from the blood and feeds all the cells. So our body is very dependent on insulin, but when we have too much, it can cause some damage. What happens is as there's more and more glucose in our blood from the foods that we eat, insulin will have to increase more and more to take care of all that sugar, to bring it down out of the blood and into the body. One of the reasons for that is high glucose has a very damaging effect on the body as well. It can cause nerve issues, it can cause eye issues, and cause all sorts of problems. So the body very desperately wants to get that sugar out of the blood and into the cells where it belongs, and insulin is that main delivery driver that does that. The problem comes when everybody's already fed and there's still more glucose left to disperse. Insulin's got to do something with it. Imagine ordering a pizza and you have your delivery driver come and you deliver your pizza, and then an hour later he comes again. You only ordered one pizza, but now he's coming again with more pizza, and then again with more pizza, and he just keeps returning. And you're like, wait a minute, we don't need this much. We don't eat this much. It becomes a problem when there's too much glucose in our blood. Insulin is constantly trying to remove it and put it somewhere. So it's putting it in the cells. If the cells are full, it's got to put it in the fat cells. If the fat cells are full, it's got to put it in the liver. It's got to put it in the pancreas. It's got to put it in any organ that it can find, any room that it can find. As insulin continues to increase to take care of all the sugar that's in the blood, now instead of having one pizza delivery driver show up your door, now you have 5. You only ordered 1 pizza, but now you have 5 showing up, okay? And you, like I said earlier, you don't eat that much. You don't need that much. What are you going to do with all that pizza? It's just going to sit in your house and rot. And so you can't store that much pizza in your house. And that's what happens to the cells. They can only use the amount of food that they need right then. They can't store extra fuel. They just need the amount that they use right then, and that's it. If they are overfed by insulin, they can pop like a balloon. It's called apoptosis, cell death. Basically, when it's like when you're blowing up a balloon and you keep putting more air in and more air and more air in, and it just pops. The same thing with the cells. Muscle cells, brain cells, they can only take so much glucose that they can use right then. They can't store any. So if they are overfed, they can die. Well, they don't want to die. So they put out a restraining order out against insulin and say, insulin, I'm sorry, but we don't want to see you on our property again. Now here's the thing, those cells still need to eat. They still need energy, they still need food. And insulin is the only delivery driver in the whole entire body that brings food to them. So now, after a little while, they're going to be starving, and they're going to send messages to the brain, little text messages. Hey, brain, we're hungry. Can you get us some food? Because we're really hungry. And this is during the same time that they have a fence around their yard and a mean dog, and they got a no trespassing sign for insulin. So they don't want insulin on their property because they know that they could die if insulin gets too crazy. So now they have this restraining order, but they're hungry, so they tell the brain, hey, we need food. And so you have these hunger signals that go to the brain. And this is why people can eat and still feel like they're hungry. If you've ever had that issue where you just ate, but you still feel hungry, you don't feel energized, your brain doesn't seem to be working properly, you're feeling unmotivated, you're feeling tired, fatigued, but you just ate, and that food should have given you energy so you could go about your day. But instead, you feel more tired. You feel like your brain isn't working the way it should. Well, that's because of insulin resistance. So when the cells don't have their food, they will suffer, and they pass that suffering on to you. Probably the first symptoms of insulin resistance are brain fog and fatigue or tiredness. And it's the first step of the journey into insulin resistance is you'll notice that you'll eat and you just won't be energized like you used to be. If you feel like you have to constantly take a nap after every meal, that's a sign of insulin resistance. That's one of the first signs I had. I would get really sleepy after breakfast. I would have breakfast at 6, and by 8 o'clock, I was done. I needed a nap. I would have lunch at 12 or 1, and by 2 or 3, I was done. I needed another nap. So that's how I noticed that I started having insulin issues. I didn't know for a long while afterwards, but when I look back, that's when I started having issues, was when I was getting tired after meals. So now we have the body, insulin resistant. The muscle cells, the brain cells are resistant to insulin. They're refusing insulin. The insulin still has all the sugar. Now they have even more sugar because they can't take it to the cells. Now they have more sugar that they got to get rid of. So what are they going to do? Now they start taking it to the fat cells. This is when you start to notice the belly fat, when you start to notice the weight gain. This is when you start to notice the obesity. The fat cells cannot be insulin resistant. They cannot refuse insulin. So they take whatever insulin gives them, and they go from being their normal little cells to 10 times their size. Fat cells have this ability to store. This is what they're made for. They're made to store. They're made to grow bigger and bigger and bigger, but they too can die. They also can have cell death, apoptosis. But unfortunately, they can't stop insulin. So what are they to do? What fat cells will do is they will start to leak out their contents. So insulin's feeding the fat cell through the front, and out the back it's just dropping right out. And that way the cell keeps from overexpanding and popping. Unfortunately, all that fat that's leaking out of the cell causes an issue. As it's going into the interstitial space, the immune system gets turned on. They see something that is there that it's not supposed to be there, and they start the alarms. It's time to clean up. What's going on here? What's with all this stuff? So this is how inflammation starts to rise in the body. Inflammation is a body's process of cleaning up foreign stuff and healing the body. So when there's an issue like fat leaking out of a fat cell, the body's going to try to clean it up. At the same time, as the fat cells are growing bigger and bigger, they're pushing themselves away, farther and farther away from the blood vessels. Fat cells need oxygen and food just like every other cell out there. And as they get bigger and bigger, they push themselves farther away from the capillaries, and they become hypoxic, so they're losing oxygen. And so when they're in this dire need for the oxygen, they will secrete a chemical that will encourage blood vessel growth toward them so that they will get their blood supply back, so they won't be hypoxic. That right there, that chemical is also inflammatory in the body. And that's another way that inflammation starts to creep up in the body. You've heard of, oh, I have inflammation, or your inflammation levels are high. What does that even mean? That's one of the things that it means. That's one of the ways it gets started. As the fat cells get full, we don't make new fat cells. At the end of adolescence, we have all the fat cells we will ever have. They get replaced every 10 years, but our number doesn't change. If you have, I'll just throw a random number. If you have 10,000 fat cells by the end of adolescence, that's the number you're going to have until maybe closer to when you're 60 or 70, when the number starts to decline a little bit. But you can't make new fat cells or more fat cells unless you have certain genetic conditions going on, where you can get hyper obese or morbidly obese. It takes a special genetic situation to be able to make more fat cells, and most people do not have this. And so when your fat cells get full, that's it. You're not going to make new ones. So now the body has to store all that excess of glucose somewhere else. So insulin is hard at work doing its job, and so now it's taking that fat and it's putting that sugar, which turns into fat. It's putting it in the liver. It's putting it in the pancreas. It's putting it in organs where it's putting in you heard of visceral fat around your organs. It's putting it there. It's trying to find ways to store this sugar, because what insulin wants to do is it wants to grow and it wants to store. That's what it wants to do. It never wants to get rid of it. It doesn't want you to waste fat. It's very conservative. It wants to keep it all in the body, in the system. So it will find any way it can to store it. And this is how non-alcoholic fatty liver disease starts. Now you've got fat in your liver where it's not supposed to be, and it's starting to gum up the liver. And I have that condition. My liver was 13 centimeters back in 2012, and within a couple of years of dealing with this insulin resistance, my liver went to 20 centimeters. So from 13 centimeters to 20 centimeters, 7 centimeters of growth in just a couple of years. And so this causes, it's a common thing now to have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and they're finding it in children now. So even children are being diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and this is how it's caused. A high sugar diet causes high insulin. High insulin then causes insulin resistance. Insulin resistance then causes all this extra glucose. It causes brain fog and fatigue, which makes a person eat more and have cravings. And then there's more glucose to take care of, and so then the insulin is pushing that glucose wherever it can, storing it wherever it can, and that leads to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. As the visceral space is now filled up and the organs are filled with fat, now the body has no way to get rid of the sugar. It tries through the urine, but it's not fast enough, and so now glucose levels start to stay high all the time, and this is when a person finally gets diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. The thing is, insulin resistance takes years and even decades to form. It's not something that happens. Type 2 diabetes is not something that just happens now, just out of nowhere. It's something that takes years and even decades to develop. The general consensus is that insulin resistance is a bad thing. It's something that we don't want. It causes a lot of problems. But when you really think about it, insulin resistance is actually a protective mechanism. It keeps insulin from destroying our bodies from the inside out. That being said, insulin resistance should be a temporary fix, not a permanent fix. There's a couple times in a person's life where the body will become insulin resistant on purpose, and it doesn't have anything to do with diet. It has to do with time of growth. So when a child enters puberty, they will naturally become more insulin resistant as they're trying to put away fuel for the upcoming growth spurt. And also during pregnancy, a woman will become insulin resistant to be able to store more energy for the growth of her baby, and also after birth for breastfeeding the child, long enough to survive to eat regular food. Back before food was constantly available to us, insulin resistance also helped the human species to survive. When there was lots of fruits on the trees, you were able to eat and basically store fat so that you would have plenty to live off of during the winter when you didn't have fruit and you could only survive off of hunting. So insulin resistance is not a bad thing. It is just bad when it's constantly turned on. So that's how insulin resistance happens, and that's how type 2 diabetes happens. And the good news is that this is reversible. You can reverse early insulin resistance, and you can reverse late insulin resistance, which is type 2 diabetes. What you have to do is reverse the order of things. So if eating food that spikes insulin causes the problem, then eating foods that don't spike insulin would be the solution. What are the foods that spike insulin? Well, they are carbs. And an easy way to test is by testing your blood sugar to see what happens after you eat. If you're like me, I have a Freestyle Libre. I'm trying to see if I can get it back here on my leg right here. It is a CGM, continual glucose monitor, that keeps track of my sugar levels. And I can see on that what happens when I eat food. If I eat an apple, my sugar and insulin is going to go really high. If I eat a steak, it's not going to move hardly at all anywhere. So checking your blood sugar will let you know what we've already discovered, that carbs spike insulin. So if you want to keep your insulin down, you want to limit the carbs, and especially the ones that are like grains, fruits, certain fruits, any sugar, candy, sodas, all of that kind of stuff will spike sugars, which will spike insulin, and that will start that whole process of insulin resistance that we talked about earlier. So if you've been diagnosed with insulin resistance, this is something that didn't just happen, it's been happening for a long time. The diet that you have had for all these years is affecting your health. And it's finally come to a point where your body can no longer store anymore. It has no more choices. And so it's affecting your health. And the easiest way to fix it is to reverse your insulin resistance by bringing insulin levels down. Unfortunately, there is nothing out there where we can test insulin at home. There's no CGM or no monitor that we can use to test our insulin levels at home. But we do know that sugar spikes insulin. So depending on the foods that you eat and what their glycemic index is, you can tell if this food is going to be safe for you or not. And for the most part, carbs are going to be the most offending things. Protein is not a fuel source. It is a building block. So when you eat it, it doesn't get converted to sugar like carbs does. Your body has two fuel sources. It has sugar and it has ketones, and ketones come from fat. So sugar and fat are your fuel sources. Protein is not a fuel source. It is a building block. It helps to build up the body and to repair it. So if you eat a steak and you eat it when your sugar levels are in the fasting ranges, 70 to 100. When you eat any kind of protein, glucagon turns on and raises your sugar a little bit. The pancreas makes glucagon, and it's what keeps you steady at night when you're sleeping or when you're exercising or in between meals. Glucagon does its work when insulin is resting. So when you're eating protein, you don't need insulin for that because there's no carbs. So glucagon goes up a little bit and raises your sugars, just a little bit, but it doesn't do anything to the insulin. So you're just going steady. If you were to have a steak when, say, your sugar is at 120, let's say you ate an apple and the apple brought you to 120, that spiked sugar and it also spiked insulin, because once sugar gets above 100, insulin has to go up a little higher than normal. So then now your sugar's at 120 and your insulin is up. If you have a steak, glucagon is going to kick in, because glucagon will always kick in when you eat anything that's protein. And so then glucagon kicks in, you're at 120, now it's going to raise you to 140. That's more sugar for insulin to take care of now. So insulin has to increase. So when you're eating protein and your sugar levels are above the fasting ranges, or if you're eating protein with carbs, it will spike sugar and insulin more than if you just ate the protein by itself when sugar was lower. This is why drugs like metformin or supplement like berberine works really great for people whose sugars are already pretty high to begin with. Both of those medications help to stop glucagon production. And so that way you can eat protein that doesn't spike insulin, and it keeps sugar from going up because of glucagon. I actually have a cat that just recently got diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic, and he eats nothing but meat, nothing but protein, and yet his sugar goes really high. And it's not because there's any sugar in that meat, and it's not because that meat turns into sugar. It's because whenever he eats meat, glucagon gets spiked. And so glucagon will raise his sugars up to 200 or whatever. And then I have to give him insulin to bring it down. Because him being a type 1 diabetic, he doesn't have any insulin, so I have to give him a shot. But so for people who are dealing with high sugar levels, metformin or berberine, probably a more natural option is berberine. And I think it has less side effects, digestive side effects. I would suggest taking berberine to help keep the sugars down whenever you eat protein, because glucagon will want to spike whenever you eat protein. So that'll keep the sugars down, which will in turn keep the insulin down, which after time, the cells will let their guards down and rescind the restraining order and tear down the fence and put away the vicious dog and allow insulin back in. So that can be done, and it takes a little bit of time, not as long as it took to build up the insulin resistance, but it does take a little bit of time, and it does work. Some of you guys would ask, isn't there a medication that can just lower insulin? Can I just take a medication to lower the insulin and then, take care of the insulin resistance? Well, there is a medication, and it's called diazoxide, and it is often used for people with insulinomas or nocidioblastosis. The only problem is that it does come with side effects, like most medications. It causes you to have excessive hair growth, especially on your face, causes edema, basically retention of water, and it has a few other side effects that are not really that comfortable. And this medication is used in case nothing else is available. And it is hard to come by, actually. I'm allergic to it. It didn't help me, which is great because I see a lot of people struggling to get a hold of it. But so there is that medication, and it is actually a calcium channel blocker. And I found out recently that magnesium is a natural calcium channel blocker. So taking magnesium will help if you aren't already regular, because when you take magnesium, it will increase your bowel movements, put it that way. Yeah. So if you're constipated, magnesium will be great. But if you're not, you might not want to take too much. I want to go a little bit into my own personal story. With my insulinoma, the premise is the same. High insulin equals high insulin resistance, or equals insulin resistance. So my goal is to reduce the amount of insulin that my tumor makes. And I will discuss this in another video, but I have something called a reactive insulinoma, where it only kicks in after I eat. Most insulinomas produce insulin 24/7. It just never stops. So it's constantly what it does. If it brings sugar down, it causes hypoglycemia. It causes your sugar to go really low, which means that you have to constantly be eating to keep your sugar up. Mine is reactive, so it only kicks in after I eat. So what it does, if I eat, the more carby that I eat, the higher the insulin goes. So I have had to learn, in my experience, to eat low carb. The lower the carb, the better, to reduce the insulin. And since insulin is storing all this fat constantly, I have to get my body into a state of ketosis, of burning ketones and burning fat, to be able to get rid of or undo the damage that insulin has done because it's been too high. The only problem with that is that you cannot burn fat if insulin is high. So if insulin is just a little tiny bit too high, you will not be able to burn fat. And you'll also not be able to reach glycogen stores. Those are stores of energy, like just stores of glucose inside your muscle that you can use in case of emergencies or in case you have to fast for some weird reason. And when your insulin is high, you will not be able to use either of those. So instead, your body turns to your own muscle, your leg muscles and your butt muscles, and it pulls protein from there. This is the only time protein becomes sugar. It's when it's in the process of gluconeogenesis, where the body has to take protein and convert it into sugar to be able to keep your sugar steady. When it doesn't have access to fat, it doesn't have access to glycogen stores, it has to use your own muscles. And it'll use the muscles from your butt and your legs first. Now, I used to be obese. I wasn't always obese. When I got married and when I was 23, I was 105 pounds. And when the insulin resistance started to get bad, I think it was 2013. And between 2013 and 2016, I had gained, maybe it was 2014. Yeah, 2014 to 16. I gained about 50 pounds in less than 2 years, and that was with, doing 5 to 10 miles of cardio a day. I would go walking. I enrolled in boot camp. I was strength training at home with the free weights that I had. I was doing everything I can to keep my weight down, and it was just going up and up and up. I was trying low carb there at one point, and it's like it slowed it down, but it wasn't stopping the weight gain. And it took a while to figure out what was going on. Low carb would have been enough for maybe normal people, but with me having an insulinoma that produced enough insulin for 20 people, it took some serious effort to get it under control. The way we discovered what was going on was that we did an oral glucose tolerance test. My first ones, I've done about 8 of these tests, and my first ones were 3 hours long. I recommend 5 hours long, where they check your sugar and your insulin every single hour. You come in fasting, they take your levels, they do an arm draw and they take your levels, then they give you a weird soda to drink, and it's nasty. And you have to drink it in 5 minutes, and then as soon as you're done drinking it, they start the timer for 1 hour. And every hour on the hour for 3 hours total, they will check they would do an arm draw and check your blood sugar and your insulin, and then report later and see what happened. And my very first one, I started out at normal levels, and within a couple hours, I dropped to the 50s. I had something called reactive hypoglycemia, where because of the amount of sugar that I was taking in, insulin was going crazy high and it was just squashing down the sugar. So instead of going up with the soda, I just went straight down. And my insulin levels were high, my sugar was really low, and so that was enough to kind of figure out that something was really wrong. And it took a couple of years to do a fasting test for this tumor. And when I did the fasting test, I discovered how good I felt with fasting. It was a very strange experience. Quickly, I'll get into it, but the first 24 hours of the fast were not comfortable. I had a splitting headache. My stomach felt like it was going to eat itself, and it just was not a good feeling. But at the 36-hour mark, I woke up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I had so much energy. I had no headaches. I had mental clarity. I had no hunger. My stomach was like just chill, and I couldn't believe it. I felt amazing. I had all this energy. I felt like I could do anything. And from that time on, I'm like, fasting is really, really good to me. So I started fasting. After that test, I went home, and the effects lasted for a couple weeks where I felt great. And then I started fasting on the weekends for 36 hours. And it was kind of like a reset button. It helped reset me. And I know 36 hours sounds like an insane amount for most people. But a similar idea would be like to do intermittent fasting, where you don't eat for maybe starting out with 13 hours. You know, you skip breakfast or eat breakfast a little later. And then you go to 14 hours and work your way up to 16 or 18 or 20 hours of fasting every day. And you'll find out that, number one, it lowers your insulin levels. And number two, it'll start to repair the damage and start to burn up the fat that you've stored. And a good point for that, I also need to point this out. A very important point I have to make is that every time you stick something in your mouth, you are going to spike insulin. You're going to get the whole digestive process going. And what a lot of people don't know is that you actually have 2 insulin spikes with every meal. One happens as soon as you put food in your mouth. Before you even swallow it, you will get a small spike of insulin. It's called part of the cephalic stage of digestion. Cephalic means head. So it all starts in the head. As soon as your salivary glands can tell that there's food coming in, it sends a message to the pancreas saying, hey, food's coming, let's get it going. So the pancreas secretes a little bit of insulin. So if you have a CGM and you watch, as soon as you put food in your mouth, you'll see your sugar dip just a little bit. That's that first spurt of insulin. And then as the food starts to hit your bloodstream, it's going to go up, your sugar is going to go up, and then it's going to come back down once the insulin hits it again. So there are 2 spurts of insulin. So every time you stick food in your mouth, you're going to spike insulin. Even if it's just candy or gum, you're going to spike insulin. So when you see those suggestions for eating 5 to 6 small meals a day, you have to understand how flawed that information is, and that advice is so wrong, because every time you stick food in your mouth, you're going to spike insulin, and you're going to spike enough for a whole meal. So if you're constantly eating several meals a day, 5, 6, 7, 8 meals a day, you're constantly going to be keeping insulin elevated. When you keep insulin up the whole time, you're actually increasing insulin resistance. And so what you want to do is you want to eat, you want sugar to go up, you want to come down, and then everything's chill. That's what you want. You don't want sugar to be constantly up or and insulin be constantly up fighting the sugar, because that's just going to increase your insulin resistance. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you don't eat all day long. So this is where intermittent fasting comes in. It makes your eating window smaller. You're fasting a good amount of time to help bring the insulin levels down and to help to burn up some of that fat that you've been storing. And then you have a window of eating. For me, 4 hours is good enough. I fast about 20 hours a day, and then I have an eating window of 4 hours where I get all of my calories in. I get all my food in that 4 hours, and then I'm good, and I'm not hungry the rest of the time. Now, in the beginning, you may feel hungry all the time. So in the beginning, you might feel hungry more often because you've trained your body to eat more often. If you've been dealing with insulin resistance for a while, you have a lot of cravings that you deal with, and you're constantly feeling hungry, and you're probably eating often. Probably eating a meal and a snack, and another meal, another snack, another meal, another snack, probably eating late at night. So in the beginning, you probably will have hunger symptoms. And you can retrain your body to not be hungry at those times. Because basically your body is not hungry. You have plenty of stores. It's just that you have trained your body to have an alarm. This is when you eat. I used to eat every 2 hours. And so every 2 hours I get the whole array of hunger symptoms. I would get the stomach noises. I would get the brain fog. I would get being hangry. All of these things would happen every 2 hours because I trained my body to do that. But when I started retraining my body that it wasn't going to get to eat that often, it took a little bit of time, but I was able to retrain my body. And now my body doesn't ask for food until about 5 o'clock in the afternoon or in the early evening, because it knows that's when I eat, and I don't get any hunger symptoms of any kind before then. Doesn't matter if I go exercising, whatever I do, I don't get any hunger symptoms until then, because I've trained my body when it's time to eat. So if you've been told that you have insulin resistance, one way to make sure is by going and checking your fasting insulin levels. Normal fasting insulin should be between 5 and 8. Once you hit 9, you're hitting insulin resistance. Lab reference levels say 2 to 17 or 2 to 24 or any variation there, and that is incorrect. If you get below 2 or above 17, you're actually in a lot of hurt in either direction. So it's too vague, it's too far apart. If you want a better number, 5 to 8 is a good healthy numbers. 9, you're hitting insulin resistance. And so you go get your fasting insulin levels done. And if you want to go a little further, you can go do a 3 to 5 hour oral glucose tolerance test where you have them check sugar and insulin at every single hour. They normally just check sugar and they only do 1 or 2 hours. You want at least 3 hours, 5 hours is better, and you want both sugar and insulin checked at every single hour. And that will give you so much information of what is going on in your body every time you eat. Once you have those numbers, then what you can do is you can work on your diet. Number one thing to get rid of is anything that is really high carb. If you're doing the fast food and candies and sodas and things like that, eliminate that first. Most people, one of the easiest things to get rid of is soda. Once you change your soda, if you're a big soda drinker, that's going to make a huge difference in your life. Just getting rid of the soda is going to make a huge difference. Basically, you want to get rid of any of the fast-acting carbs, not just the sugars, the sweet stuff, but like rice, bread, pastas, crackers, cookies, pancakes, things like that. You want to get rid of those fast-acting carbs because those will spike insulin like crazy. Oh, and most fruits, blueberries, strawberries, any berries has low sugar and they're okay. But most fruits are very high in sugar and they will spike you very fast. In the beginning, while you are changing your diet, your cells are still going to be very hungry because your body is going to be insulin resistant for a while. So you're still going to get those hunger pangs and brain fog. And there is a way to beat that. Remember, I told you the fuel sources are sugar and fat, or sugar and ketones. One of the easiest ways to get, since your body's blocked at getting sugar is not going to go to your brain cells and your muscle cells because they're insulin resistant. So what you can do is you can take ketones, MCT oil. MCT oil has medium chain triglycerides, and those get metabolized differently. They go straight to your liver and get spun into ketones, and ketones is like jet fuel for your brain and for your heart. And so they provide energy where sugar is not able to because it doesn't require insulin. And then another thing to remember, actually I haven't even talked about this yet, there is a secret backdoor to open, that can open to sugar on the cells when you're insulin resistant. So with insulin resistance, the front door is blocked. Insulin can't get in and to bring sugar. But there is a secret backdoor that can open up and allow sugar in, and that gets opened up by exercise. Exercise will open a secret backdoor in the back of the cell that will allow sugar to get in without the need for insulin. So one of the best ways to use this is right after you eat, go for a 10-minute walk. That 10-minute walk will open up the secret door for all the cells that are insulin resistant to get glucose. And so that means that they will feel fed and they won't be constantly crying to the brain asking for energy. So you won't have that constant hunger that comes because of the insulin resistant cells being hungry. That is why you'll often feel more energized after going for a walk or exercising, is because now all that sugar is able to enter into the muscles and into your brain from the body without the need of insulin. So if you're insulin resistant, exercise is a way to get your cells fed, and MCT oil. MCT doesn't have to be MCT oil, so it can be butter, anything that has MCTs. So that's butter, that's ghee, that's coconut oil, that's palm kernel oil, that's goat milk, goat cheese. These are the things that have MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, that can easily get turned into ketones, and that can provide your body with the energy that you need while you're transitioning into a more insulin sensitive state. And when you are ready to ramp up your progress, you can start fasting. So look at where you are right now, how long you go without eating overnight, and then just start increasing that. I use the Zero fasting app. I like to use that for all my fasting sessions, for both intermittent and longer fasting sessions that I like to do. You can use that to keep track of your progress. And so if you're fasting 8 hours now, you can increase to 9, and then maybe in a couple weeks increase to 10, and just continue working on your progress and increasing your time until you get to maybe 16 or 18 hours. I like 20, but that might be harder for some people. But include intermittent fasting, and that will help to keep your insulin levels down, and not eating meals as often. Having 2 meals a day is a good place, maybe even 3 if they're evenly spaced out. You want to give yourself a good amount of time between meals with no snacking for your insulin to come down. But the longer time that you give for insulin to be low, the more time that you have for your body to repair itself and to bring insulin down and to get rid of the damage that's been caused by the high insulin. I hope that this video has been helpful. I'm sure I'll think of some more tips that I could have given you guys later after this video is done. But I hope that it made sense, and I hope that it was clear what causes insulin resistance, and that it's a protective mechanism. The body uses this to keep insulin from damaging the cells from the inside out. And I hope you now know that you can reverse this. It can be reversed even if you're at the point of type 2 diabetes. You can reverse this. It just takes a little longer and more decided effort, but it is reversible, and I believe that you can do it. I did it. I used to be obese, used to be in terrible shape, and now I'm doing really good. So if you have been diagnosed with insulin resistance, tell me about it in the comments below. Tell me what your symptoms are, what you've been dealing with, what's the hardest thing to deal with. If you have any questions over something that I haven't covered, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll either answer them or make a video in the future to answer those questions. And I guess I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.